A man's hand turns black in the cold. Not frostbite, not yet, just black. Frozen solid, like stone. He keeps digging, because if he stops, they shoot him. 60 degrees. 60 degrees below zero. Cold enough to shatter steel. Cold enough to freeze breath before it leaves your mouth. And this man, he's building a railway, with a pickaxe, through frozen ground, in the middle of Siberian nowhere. He's one of hundreds of thousands, soldiers, peasants, prisoners, political exiles, sent to connect Moscow to the Pacific Ocean. 9,289 kilometres. Through hell, the Trans-Siberian Railway, the longest railway on Earth. It took 25 years to build, cost over 100,000 lives, maybe more. Nobody kept accurate count of the bodies. But here's what nobody tells you. When the railway finally opened, Russia had already lost a war because it wasn't finished in time. Entire sections had to be rebuilt 3, 4 times because the ground swallowed the tracks. Workers laid rails on frozen rivers. Yes, trains on ice. And one section, just one, required 39 tunnels hand-carved through mountains and 200 bridges and cost more than the rest of the railway combined. Tonight, we're going back to 1891, when a Tsar decided to do the impossible and paid for it with an ocean of blood. Russia had a problem, a massive geographical problem. The country stretched from Europe to the Pacific Ocean, the largest empire on Earth. But it wasn't connected. If you wanted to travel from Moscow to Vladivostok, Russia's Pacific port, you had 3 options. Option 1, sail around the entire continent, through the Mediterranean, through the Suez Canal, across the Indian Ocean, up past Japan, months at sea. Option 2, travel overland, by horse, by cart, through thousands of kilometres of wilderness, rivers, swamps, mountains, forests so dense you'd disappear forever. Most people never made it. Option 3 didn't exist yet, but Tsar Alexander III had a vision. A railway, straight across Siberia, connecting the heart of Russia to the Pacific. Why? Economics. Siberia was full of resources, coal, gold, timber, furs, but no way to get them out. Military strategy. Russia's enemies, Japan, China, Britain, were circling the Pacific. Russia needed to move troops quickly and control. Siberia was wild, lawless, full of exiles and criminals. A railway meant power, order, presence, but mostly pride. Alexander III wanted to prove Russia could do what no other nation could, conquer the impossible. In 1891 he made the decision, build it. His son, Tsarevich Nicholas, the future Tsar Nicholas II, travelled to Vladivostok. On March 19th he laid the first stone, a ceremonial beginning. But the real work, that was about to become a nightmare. The plan was ambitious, insanely ambitious. Build the railway from multiple points simultaneously. Start from Moscow, heading east. Start from Vladivostok, heading west. And start from the middle too. 6 sections under construction at once. The idea? Meet in the middle. Connect the pieces. Finish faster. The reality? Chaos. Because Siberia wasn't empty land waiting to be tamed. It was a frozen, hostile, deadly expanse that killed everything that entered it. The workers arrived in waves. Soldiers from the Russian army, ordered to build, peasants from villages, recruited with promises of wages, and prisoners. Thousands and thousands of prisoners, political exiles, criminals, men sentenced to railway labour instead of execution. They were chained, marched into the wilderness, given tools and told to dig. No choice, no escape. Desertion meant death. The conditions were unimaginable. Workers lived in camps, tents in summer, wooden barracks in winter. Overcrowded, filthy. Disease spread like wildfire, typhus, cholera, dysentery. Men would wake up healthy, be dead by nightfall. The work schedule, 11 hours a day in summer, longer if the foreman demanded it. Winter, construction stopped, mostly because it was physically impossible. But when spring came, the workers returned, and started rebuilding everything winter had destroyed. Siberia is not just cold, it's a specific kind of cold that doesn't exist anywhere else. Permafrost, ground that's been frozen solid for thousands of years, year-round, never thaws. In summer the top layer melts, just the top, a few feet. Beneath that, rock-hard ice. Try to dig into permafrost with a shovel. The shovel breaks. Try dynamite. It works. Barely. The explosion sends frozen chunks flying. Workers die from the shrapnel. But even when you manage to dig a foundation and lay the tracks, summer comes. The top layer thaws, turns to mud, swamp. The tracks sink. The railway disappears into the ground. Engineers tried everything. Wooden mattresses. Beneath the rails, gravel beds, layers of logs. Some sections were rebuilt 3 times, 4 times, and every time workers died doing it. There's a saying among historians: every sleeper on the Trans-Siberian Railway cost a life. Sleeper. The wooden beam beneath the tracks. Hundreds of thousands of sleepers. You do the math. Then there were the rivers. Siberia has 16 major rivers, each one a monster. The Ob, the Yenisei, the Lena, the Amur. Rivers so wide you can't see the other side. Rivers that freeze solid in winter and flood violently in spring. The original plan? Ferries. Yes, train ferries. Load the entire train onto a boat, cross the river, continue. In winter, lay tracks on the ice, drive the train across. This actually happened. Trains, locomotives weighing hundreds of tons, crossing frozen rivers. Sometimes the ice cracked. The train would plunge through. Passengers, cargo, crew, gone. But before the bridges were built, there was an incident that haunts the railway's history. A wooden trestle bridge over the Quenga River, hastily constructed, poorly inspected. A supply train approached, loaded with materials, food, explosives. The engineer saw the bridge swaying, unstable. He tried to stop, too late. The locomotive hit the bridge at half speed. The structure buckled, collapsed. The entire train plunged into the river below. 40 workers aboard, riding in open freight cars. Most drowned immediately, trapped under wreckage. The current swept bodies downstream. Only 7 survived. They pulled themselves from the freezing water, crawled onto the bank. By the time help arrived the next day, 3 more had died from hypothermia. The bodies were never recovered. The river kept them. Construction resumed 2 weeks later, on a new bridge, built in the exact same spot. But that wasn't the only disaster that haunts the railway's history. There was the tunnel collapse near Sludyanka. Workers were blasting through granite, carving one of the Lake Baikal tunnels. The rock was unstable. Everyone knew it. But the schedule didn't allow for delays. They set the charges, lit the fuses, retreated to what they thought was a safe distance. The explosion came, but it was bigger than expected. The blast triggered a chain reaction. The entire tunnel ceiling collapsed, not just where they'd been working, the entire 200-metre section. 12 workers were inside, checking the previous day's work. They never had a chance. Tons of granite buried them instantly. The rescue efforts lasted 3 days. Teams dug frantically, by hand, with shovels and pickaxes. They found the first body on day 2, crushed beyond recognition. By day 3, they'd recovered 5 more. The other 6, the tunnel kept them. The engineers made a decision. Digging them out would take weeks, risk more lives, delay the schedule. So they sealed that section, permanently started a new tunnel, 20 metres to the left. Those 6 workers are still there, entombed in granite, beneath Lake Baikal. When trains pass through that section today, passengers have no idea. They're riding through a grave. The families were told their loved ones died in an accident. No details, no bodies returned. Just a letter and silence. One widow walked from her village to the construction site. Over 200 kilometres, on foot. She demanded to see where her husband died. The foreman refused, threatened to have her arrested for trespassing. She stood at the tunnel entrance for 3 days, crying, praying, waiting for something, anything. Finally, a priest came, said some words over the sealed tunnel. She left, but she never stopped believing her husband was still alive in there, trapped, waiting. She died 10 years later, still waiting. This story repeated itself hundreds of times along the railway, families searching, grieving, never finding answers. The railway swallowed their loved ones and moved on. Eventually they built proper bridges, massive steel structures, engineered by specialists brought in from Europe and America. The Amur Bridge alone took years. At the time, it was one of the longest bridges in the world. But until those bridges were finished, ferries and ice, desperation engineering. And then there was Lake Baikal, the deepest lake on Earth, 1,042 meters deep, ancient, sacred, and directly in the path of the railway. Going around it meant 260 kilometers of nightmarish terrain, mountains dropping straight into the water, cliffs, unstable rock, the most expensive, most dangerous section of the entire railway. But they had no choice. In 1895, while that section was being built, they needed a temporary solution. So they built a train ferry, the SS Baikal, a massive, ice-breaking ship designed to carry entire trains across the lake, rails on the deck. The train would roll onto the ship would cross, the train would roll off. In winter, when the lake froze, they did something even crazier. They laid tracks on the ice, trains, on a frozen lake. It worked, mostly, until the ice started cracking. Then they'd evacuate everyone and wait for the ferry. But the permanent solution, the Circumbaikal Railway, that was a masterpiece. 260 kilometers of track carved along the southern shore of Lake Baikal. 39 tunnels blasted through solid rock. Over 200 bridges and viaducts. Italian stone masons were brought in. Specialists, artists with stone. They hand-carved the tunnels, arched, beautiful, functional. It took 60,000 workers. It cost 3 times more per kilometre than any other section. They called it the golden buckle of the Trans-Siberian Railway because of the cost, because of the beauty, and because of the bodies buried in the rock. Winter in Siberia is not a season, it's an execution. Temperatures drop to 40 dm, 50 dm, 60 dm. At 50 dm, spit freezes before it hits the ground. Exposed skin turns black in minutes. Metal tools become so cold they burn your hands. Workers wrapped themselves in every piece of clothing they owned. Rags, animal skins, anything. But it wasn't enough, so they developed survival tactics. Desperate, brutal, effective. They learned to stuff their boots with straw. It provided insulation, kept toes from freezing. But the straw had to be changed daily. If it got wet from sweat, it froze, and your feet froze with it. They wrapped their hands in strips of cloth soaked in animal fat. The grease created a barrier, slowed the cold. At night, workers slept in groups, 10, 15 men packed together in a single bunk. Body heat was the only heat. The men on the outside edges, they rotated to the middle, every hour. Otherwise they'd freeze. Some workers dug pits in the ground, covered them with logs and dirt, slept underground, like animals. It was warmer, barely, but safer than the barracks, where men froze in their sleep. They burned anything they could find: wood, coal, dried dung, scraps of cloth. Some work crews built fires directly on the permafrost, melting the top layer just enough to dig. But fires attracted men like moths, desperate for warmth. Foremen had to post guards, to keep workers from abandoning their posts to huddle by the flames. And then there was vodka. The workers brewed it themselves, from stolen grain, fermented in hidden barrels. Drinking it was forbidden, punishable by flogging, but they drank anyway. Because vodka did 2 things. It numbed the cold, briefly, and it numbed the reality of where they were, what they were doing, how many of them would die. But vodka killed too. Men would drink, pass out, never, wake up, frozen solid by morning. Still, they drank. Because the cold wasn't the only thing they were trying to survive. It was the hopelessness. Men froze to death in their sleep, in the barracks, huddled together for warmth. By morning, they'd be stiff, solid. The ground was too frozen to bury them, so the bodies were stacked, like firewood, waiting for spring thaw. Then they'd dig mass graves and throw them in. No markers, no records, no one notified the families. These men just disappeared, and the railway kept moving forward. Let me tell you about one man. His name was Konstantin Ivanov, a peasant from a village near Kazan. He wasn't a criminal, wasn't a political exile. He was recruited, promised wages, promised he'd be home in 2 years. He arrived at a work camp in central Siberia, assigned to a track-laying crew. The work was brutal, but Konstantin was strong. He survived the first summer, then winter came. His crew was ordered to continue working, laying ties, hammering spikes in 45 Celsius cold. One morning Konstantin's hands froze to his hammer. The metal bonded to his skin. He couldn't let go. A foreman poured boiling water over his hands. The hammer came free, but so did the skin. His palms were raw, exposed flesh. The camp doctor, if you could call him that, had no medicine, no bandages. He wrapped Konstantin's hands in dirty cloth, told him to rest. 2 days later, infection set in. His hands swelled, turned black. The smell was unbearable. Gangrene. The doctor said the hands had to come off, both of them, but there was no anaesthetic, no surgical tools, just a saw and vodka. They held Konstantin down, poured vodka down his throat until he passed out. Then they sawed. He woke up screaming, both hands gone, stumps wrapped in blood-soaked rags. A man with no hands couldn't work, so they put him on a cart, sent him to the nearest town, dumped him at a monastery. The monks took him in, fed him, prayed for him. He lived another 3 months. Then he died. From infection, from despair. He never made it home. His family never knew what happened to him. Just another name lost to the railway. But Konstantin Ivanov wasn't alone. There were thousands like him. Men who lost hands, feet, limbs. Men who died slowly, painfully. Men whose names were never recorded. The railway consumed them and kept moving forward. But here's the cruel irony. All that suffering, all those deaths, all that impossible engineering, and when Russia needed the railway most, it wasn't finished. Russia went to war with Japan, the Russo-Japanese War. Russia needed to move troops and supplies to the Far East. Fast. The Trans-Siberian Railway was their lifeline, but the Lake Baikal section wasn't complete yet. Troops had to disembark, cross the lake by ferry, board another, train. Supplies crawled across Siberia. Japan, meanwhile, moved quickly. They destroyed the Russian fleet at Port Arthur, crushed Russian forces. Russia lost, humiliatingly. Historians agree. If the railway had been finished, Russia might have won. The railway that cost 100,000 lives failed when it mattered most. The humiliation drove the government into a frenzy. Finish it, now, whatever it takes. By 1905, the Circumbaikal section was complete. By 1916, the entire railway was operational, fully connected, no more ferries, no more gaps. But by then, Russia had bigger problems. Revolution. The Tsar was overthrown. The Bolsheviks seized power, and the Trans-Siberian Railway became a battleground. Red Army, White Army, warlords, foreign interventionists, everyone fought for control of the railway, because whoever controlled the railway controlled Siberia. Armoured trains appeared, covered in steel plates, mounted with cannons and machine guns. Mobile fortresses rolling across the steppe. One of the strangest episodes, the Czechoslovak Legion. Thousands of Czech and Slovak soldiers, former POWs, trying to get home. They seized control of the Trans-Siberian Railway, held it for months, fought everyone, Reds, Whites, Japanese. Eventually they made it to Vladivostok, sailed home. But for years the railway was chaos, blown bridges, derailed trains, burnt stations. By the time the Soviets fully controlled it, the railway needed rebuilding. Again, Under Stalin, the railway transformed. Electrification, double tracking, modernization. But the labour, still brutal. Gulag prisoners built expansions. The BAM Railway, a parallel line to the north, was constructed almost entirely by forced labour. Tens of thousands more died. The railway became a symbol of Soviet power, Soviet industry, Soviet endurance. They even built propaganda around it. The Great Soviet Achievement, conveniently forgetting the Tsarist workers who died building it first. By the 1950s, steam locomotives were replaced by diesel, then electric. The journey time dropped. What once took weeks now took days. Stations grew into cities: Novosibirsk, Irkutsk, Khabarovsk, built by the railway, dependent on it. The Trans-Siberian became more than a railway. It became the spine of Russia. Today, you can buy a ticket, $500 to $1,500, depending on class. 7 days. Moscow to Vladivostok. Tourists do it for the experience, the adventure. Luxury trains exist now. The Golden Eagle, air-conditioned cabins, fine dining, champagne, budget trains too, the Rossiya, Soviet-era carriages, bunk beds, shared bathrooms. But both travel the same tracks, laid by men who froze to death. Every kilometre, a reminder. At certain stops, elderly babushkas stand on the platform, selling food through the windows. Piroshki, smoked fish, pickles. Some of them are descendants of railway workers, still tied to the line generations later. The train runs on Moscow time, the entire journey, even though it crosses 8 time zones. Why? Because changing the clock every few hours would be chaos. So passengers exist in a strange time bubble, Moscow time, while Siberia sleeps in different hours outside. Inside the train, a samovar in every carriage, for endless tea. A provodnitsa, carriage attendant, who rules with absolute authority. She controls the heat, the cleanliness, the rules. Cross her, good luck. The windows are sealed, locked, for safety. But at longer stops, passengers spill onto platforms, stretching legs, buying snacks, breathing air that isn't recycled. Through the window, you see it all. Endless taiga forests, birch trees stretching forever, the Ural Mountains, the first glimpse that you've left Europe, the Siberian steppe, flat, empty, haunting, Lake Baikal, the deepest lake on Earth, shimmering in sunlight, and tunnels, those 39 hand-carved tunnels. Every time the train enters one, you're passing through stone carved by Italian masons over a century ago, stone stained with the sweat of 60,000 workers. The journey becomes a rhythm. Day 1, you're excited, taking photos, marvelling at the stations. By day 3, time blurs. You wake up, the landscape looks the same as yesterday, and the day before, endless birch forests, endless taiga. The train becomes your world. You learn the routine. The provodnitsa brings tea at 7 a.m. Precisely. Every morning. She sweeps the corridor at 8 a.m. You'd better have your shoes out of the way. Meals are at fixed times. The dining car fills with passengers sharing tables, sharing stories. Russians travelling home, Europeans on adventure, Australians ticking off a bucket list. Everyone speaks broken English, or broken Russian, or just gestures. It doesn't matter. The train creates community. At major stops, Yekaterinburg, Novosibirsk, Irkutsk, you have 15 minutes, maybe 20 if you're lucky. Passengers sprint to the platform, desperate for fresh air, real food. The babushkas are waiting, always waiting. They know the train schedule better than the conductors. They're there in summer heat, in winter blizzards, selling the same things their mothers sold and their grandmothers before that. You buy a piroshki, still warm, wrapped in paper. It's the best thing you've ever tasted. Not because it's fancy, because it's real, handmade by someone who's been standing on this platform for 40 years. She smiles, counts your rubles, waves as the train pulls away. You never learn her name, but you'll remember her forever. Back on the train, You watch Russia scroll past. Villages that look frozen in time, wooden houses, dirt roads, cities that appear suddenly, then vanish. At night, you lie in your bunk. The train rocks gently. The rhythm of the wheels on the tracks becomes a lullaby. Click-clack, 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 crossing Siberia, kilometre by kilometre. On day 5, you reach Lake Baikal. The train slows, deliberately. The route curves along the shore, those famous 39 tunnels. You press your face to the window. The lake stretches forever. Deep blue, ancient, sacred. Locals say you can see 40 metres down. The water is that clear. For an hour, you're mesmerised. Then the train turns inland. The lake disappears, and you realise something. This journey isn't about the destination. It's about the in-between. The moments when you're nowhere, just moving, suspended between Moscow and Vladivostok, suspended between past and present, riding on tracks built by ghosts. But beneath the romance, beneath the adventure, there's a truth nobody talks about. The bodies are still there, unmarked graves along the entire route. 100,000 men, maybe more, frozen in permafrost, buried in rock, lost in swamps, no memorials, no markers, no names. Historians estimate one death per kilometre, 9,189 kilometres, 9,189 lives, at minimum. But the real number? Probably double, triple, because record-keeping was terrible. Deliberate, some say. Prisoners who died weren't counted. Exiles who vanished weren't recorded. The Tsarist government didn't want the world to know the cost. The Soviets rewrote the history to fit their narrative. So the dead remain nameless, their sacrifice invisible. Except when you ride the train and realise every sleeper you pass over, every tunnel you enter, every bridge you cross was built by someone who never went home. So was it worth it? That's the question historians argue about. The Trans-Siberian Railway connected Russia, opened Siberia, enabled trade, moved people. It still operates, still critical. Freight, passengers, military. Without it, Russia's Far East would be isolated, vulnerable. The railway held the country together, literally. But the cost, 100,000 dead, families destroyed, lives erased. Was connectivity worth that? There's no easy answer. Progress always demands sacrifice. But how much sacrifice is too much? The men who built the Trans-Siberian didn't choose. They were ordered, forced, sentenced. They died so trains could run. And today, those trains carry tourists sipping champagne, taking selfies at Lake Baikal, marvelling at the engineering, never knowing. They're riding over graves. Close your eyes. Picture that worker again, the one from the beginning. His hand frozen black, his breath crystallized, his body shaking from cold. He's digging, because he has to. Somewhere far away, his family wonders if he's still alive. They'll never get an answer. He'll die here, frozen into the ground. And in 130 years, a train will pass over his bones. Passengers will look out the window, marvel at the beauty, never knowing he's still there, beneath them. Picture Konstantin Ivanov, the man who lost both hands, screaming as they sawed through his wrists, dying slowly in a monastery, far from home, his name forgotten until now. The Trans-Siberian Railway, the longest railway on Earth, built with blood, bone and bodies, a monument to human ambition and human cruelty. Every time a train departs Moscow, every time it arrives in Vladivostok, it carries ghosts, men who never finished their journey, men who became the railway, sweet dreams.